part of the Medicaid system in Oregon.
Mm-hmm. Does Medicaid tend to give people a difficult time getting pain medication filled? It seems to be one of the largest states that gives people a hard time with Medicaid.
I don't know if we had such a hard time early on, but as this opiate epidemic, as it's called, kind of was gaining force, it definitely became more and more of an issue. Where I think I told you this Jackson Care Connect, when they came into existence probably about 4 years ago, their introduction to providers was a fax letter that said, basically demanded a forced taper of all patients with chronic pain. And the providers had to send in a weaning plan or protocol that the insurance company would have to approve. And if they didn't approve it, they wouldn't pay for a single pill for the patients. If you didn't send a plan in, they wouldn't pay for a single pill. And there was no exceptions for any patients that maybe had been stable on higher doses or whatever. There was no exception.
So a person behind a desk at an insurance company is reviewing a tapering plan. I mean, this is bananas. So this patient, so we have an insurance salesman who's now taken over the role of you, and Mr. Insurance Man is making the decision of a person who's on and you know, some of your patients, they were on pretty high doses and they've done well for 10 years, not abused their medication. They're living good life.
Oh, absolutely. And so, you know, the majority of the patients I was treating were all inherited from this Harvard-trained pain specialist who was more than qualified. But, they had been stable for many years on stable doses and never had an overdose, never had an issue or any kind of aberrant behavior, and they were stable and had an improved quality of life and functioning. So
you attended this hearing on the telephone because there came a point in time where you had to have a hearing with Jackson, this insurance company, and you were there on behalf of your patient. And tell me about that hearing. What transpired during that hearing over the phone?
Right. So we had several patients that were under Jackson Care Connect, and so would have been affected by their proposal to wean all of them without knowing anything about any of them. One patient was able to get a hearing, requested it, and got a hearing, which, like you said, was over the phone. And she had requested me to represent her medical history, which, of course, I agreed to do. And it was before an administrative law judge, and there was probably 4 or 5 individuals on the phone from Jackson Care Connect. And there was the patient, her boyfriend, and I. And she ended up winning that decision from the administrative law judge. And then about a month later, the insurance company filed an appeal, which they lost. And so the judge sided in the patient's favor, stating that the insurance company had to pay for this patient's current level of oral opiates, which were a little over 400 milligrams of morphine equivalent dose a day, and had to reimburse her for the time that the insurance company was not paying for them.
Okay. So they had to pay her retroactively. And I'm sure this made the Oregon Medical Board seethe with fury, because it's almost like you're going, but I don't even know why the Oregon Medical Board would be involved with an insurance carrier, but we'll get involved with that. So your patient is successful. They're able to get their pain medication covered, and you're back in your office. What happens shortly after this hearing where your patient won?
Right. So a month after that hearing, I received a letter from the Oregon Medical Board stating that they had heard, in quote, that there was a hearing regarding my care, which is fallacious. It wasn't regarding my care. It was a hearing requested by the patient, which I represented her care. But and then listed several defamatory comments that were untrue and provably false, that the Oregon Medical Board in the letter stated they had heard from whoever. In Oregon, the person that makes the complaint to the board is protected, and there's no way to find out who that person is. In the regulations, it says that they have to make a complaint in good faith. Well, it could be argued that this was not made in good faith. It was made in some kind of retribution or vindictive motive because they had lost a hearing. And the medical director of Jackson Care Connect is very high up in the Oregon Health Authority and certainly has connections with the Oregon Medical Board.
So they weren't happy with this judge's ruling. Was this a federal judge? What type of judge was this that made this ruling? Where on the spectrum?
Yeah, so they're administrative law judges and they're civil judges. And so if you decide to go to a hearing against the board in Oregon, and I think in most states, it's before an administrative law judge. Okay.
So it's basically an attorney that's acting as a mediator. Right. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Now, do you think this was another doctor? I like to use the term, I like to call it what it is. Do you think a doctor ratted you out?
No, because there was nobody else who knew about this hearing besides the patient and I and Jackson Care Connect. And if you mean a doctor, meaning the medical director of Jackson Care Connect, who is a physician, I'm certain it was him.
Okay. So it was a doctor. It was just a doctor that worked with Jackson Care Connect.
Yeah, he's the medical director of Jackson Care Connect.
So, it's the irony. People, when we're raised to believe that doctors and lawyers, we have doctors on a pedestal and we hold them to this, with a light shining around their head.
Right.
And Dr. Feldman always tells me, remember, doctors are people first, doctors second. And I am shocked, I'm appalled. When I started my advocacy, I was appalled by the number of doctors that call the medical board on other doctors to be spiteful or for an insurance reason or just jealousy, competition. So this is still when I tell these stories to people are like, oh my God, doctors would never do that. I said, oh, you'd be surprised what some doctors are capable of doing. So you received this letter from your Oregon Medical Board, and were sanctions imposed?
No. So I received a letter, and the letter was asking for 8 months of medical records for 5 patients, and I think it was 5 years of medical record for this one patient who won the hearing against the insurance company. So we sent that information, and I didn't hear anything from the Oregon Medical Board for probably 2 or 3 months, and still had no idea what the issue was. Next thing I received is in June, I received in what in Oregon is called an interim stipulated order, and it states that you voluntarily agree to do these things, although you don't supposedly have to, but you're voluntarily agreeing to do what the board wants you to do while they're investigating the issue. And what they wanted me to do was to wean all of my patients, which I had over 100 patients that had chronic pain, severe chronic pain, and most of them had been in chronic pain for decades. All of them down to 120 morphine equivalent dose or less. Also I'm trying to think. Oh, in Oregon, they also don't allow anyone to prescribe soma, when they're on opiates, which is not written anywhere, but we only had like 10 patients or something on Soma, but they had been on it for a long time and stable. And then it listed a few other things, but I was in such a disagreement with what they wanted me to do because I thought it was medically unethical for the board to decide what to do with all these patients when they don't know anything about them. And I told my attorney at the time, I said, I don't think we're going to sign this. So he communicated that to the board, and the board said, that's fine. He doesn't have to sign it, but next week we'll meet and we'll just suspend his license.
Yeah.
So, right, and so if they suspend the license, then of course all of my patients are on the street and have no place to go. Including, we had about 75 patients that had intrathecal baclofen pumps that have spinal cord injuries or MS or cerebral palsy, and there's nobody in Southern Oregon who will treat them. And so they also would have had no care. And so I was stuck in this dilemma as to signing to do something which I wholeheartedly disagreed with and I thought would harm patients, or harming them more by not signing it and have them all have no place to go and apparently be in withdrawals, or if an intrathecal baclofen pump runs out, people can die. And the board didn't seem to care as to like what was going to happen to them.
Yeah, so did you sign it?
I did.
Okay. Let me ask you, how many people... I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, I signed it, and then over about a year's time, we weaned all of our patients down to what they requested of me to do, and we complied with that order above and beyond what it asked us to do over a year. But, you know, you've probably heard other stories, other providers doing the same thing, and it doesn't gain you any favors with the board in doing that.
No, and you think you're doing... I mean, there's nothing right about this situation. There's nothing right about this. There's nothing right about 13 people in Oregon who are making decisions for many different people with many different maladies, and they've made a decision to treat everybody the same way. And that letter that you got, I mean, I would be appalled. I think was that a handwritten letter that you received?
You mean from the Secretary of State?
You received a handwritten letter from somebody, and it almost seemed like it had a... tell me about the handwritten letter. Yeah, we talked about a handwritten letter that you received.
Yes, and so my receptionist, of course, was so upset about all of this, too, and we, like patients, had contacted state representatives and senators and never got any real replies from anybody. And I sent a letter to the governor, certified, never got a reply from the governor either. She had sent a letter to the Secretary of State kind of explaining the whole thing, and he sent back a handwritten note on her letter stating that he appreciated, in his words, the well-written but disturbing letter, but that as Secretary of State, he has no authority or power over the Oregon Medical Board. And then in parentheses, he put Dr. Drew should consult somebody before he contacts the governor because the Oregon Medical Board is very powerful and likely to retaliate.
Well, that's nice. Wow. It's like the mob is running the medical board in Oregon. You've got Al Capone at the helm in Oregon. Who? So Kate Brown is the governor in Oregon, I believe.
Right. So, yes.
Okay. Is Kate Brown above the medical board? Is she the only person that has control over this disastrous medical board?
Yeah, she's the only one that has any kind of authority over what the board does. And you're kind of putting your finger on the problem. The problem is that boards, in general, don't have enough accountability. And so they end up having too much power and too much authority to do things that they're not supposed to be doing and don't have the power to do, but they do it anyway, or the authority to do. So the governor is the only one that has any authority over the board, it's the legislature in the state of Oregon that votes to approve appointees that are picked by the governor. And, how long those people are in those Oregon Medical Board seats, those 13 seats, I'm not sure if there's a limit or a term limit to the time that they spend there or not. But so they're only answerable to the governor. There's nobody else. There's nobody.
And your governor can veto anything. So even if your House unanimously decided to oust, a medical board member, Al Capone, your Kate Brown could veto this. But, when I heard about that note, because I would receive that note as one thing, a threat, like, if you do this, watch out, type of thing. Well, after we spoke the other day, I went grocery shopping, and I kid you not, just when I think I want to quit all of this advocacy, that note, I was in the produce aisle on my child's life, and I stopped and I said, this is so gross. This is so disgusting. All I could think of was your receptionist handing you this handwritten note. If you do this, this is what's going to happen. So you weaned your patients down. God only knows the hell your patients have endured. I empathize with the millions of people that have had to be weaned down. Correct. And these people were living wonderful lives or fruitful lives, and now they've taken to their beds. Husbands have left their wives are leaving their husbands, kids have no parents. And, when people hear, say, 400 morphine equivalents, to a healthy person, they're like, oh my God, what type of person takes that type of medication? Why on earth would anybody need so much pain medication? So, it's the general public. But Kate Brown, apparently, she doesn't care. She's not in pain. And she left all of this power to these 13, I don't even know if they're doctors. I think a few of them are retired cops, perhaps. And they pretty much decided to write the script for your patients. So you comply with the order. A year passes. What happens a year after your patients have been weaned?
Well, right. Many of the patients are far less functional. And as you said, some were going to school, some were working. Most were far more interactive with their community and family and before the weaning began. And by the time they got down to 120 morphine equivalent dose, their lives were not nearly what it was. And so their quality of life diminished. But I've learned through the process that the board, nor very few others, care about all the things that we're supposed to monitor for, which are functionality, sleep, mood, quality of life, activities of daily living. These patients become only a number. They become just a morphine equivalent dose, and that's all that matters. It doesn't matter how they're functioning or what's going on with each individual patient. And in fact, the board, as my attorney told me, does not want to hear from the patients. They're supposed to be there to protect the patients, which would be great, and I think that service is a good one. But they're absolutely blind to how their decisions are affecting these patients, especially the ones that are suffering with chronic pain.
Sure. And how about and let's say you've got 10 doctors on the board and you've got 2 law enforcement. You've got 2 cops, 2 robbers, right? Do those cops really care about the pain? What is a cop?
Well, I think, I don't know, maybe they do, but I know that the 13 members on the board have to be some form of MD or DO or something like that. And it's the people that work under them that do the majority of the work, like the chief investigators, and the investigators are ex-law enforcement or military. And the vast majority of those people doing that kind of work at medical boards around the country are that. They're either ex-law enforcement, and you're right. I think they use them. I think the boards like to use them because of the kind of personality that is required for that kind of work.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
I get that.
Yeah, I do too. But right, I mean, they have no medical training. They have no understanding of medical issues, and this whole cell.
That would be like me going. That would be like me going to Midas Muffler for a pap smear. Oh, I'm here for my pap smear. Let me talk with the mechanic. It makes no sense. We're going to take in a quick call here for you. I've got Dr. Margaret Aranda. Hi, Dr. Aranda.
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi. Quickly, I want to welcome Dr. Miranda to the Call 360 family. She's got a show that's going to be airing pretty soon, Wednesday at 8 p.m. Dr. Aranda, what's your question for Dr. Drew, or your comment?
Oh, sure. I have a comment, Dr. Drew. First of all, I'm really glad that there are, some really quality medical professionals that have stood up to the pressure from government and politicians to help patients that we took the Hippocratic Oath for. So I just wanted to thank you, because it's been difficult to defend patients, and it shouldn't be that way.
I agree.
And Dr. Aranda, you're in California, correct?
Correct. I'm in Woodland Hills off the 101 freeway.
Yeah. I know your patients adore you as well. Thank you for calling in, Dr. Aranda, and welcome to
My pleasure.
Welcome to the
show.
All right, we'll talk with you soon. So, Dr. Drew, where are we now? So, a year passes, you've weaned your patients down, you're in Oregon, and take us present time, if you'd be so kind.
Sometime it was last year, I believe, we volunteered, and we thought it'd be a good idea through my attorney to volunteer to do go to what they call a physician assessment program. And we went to one in Denver, Colorado called CPEP. And it's a 2-day assessment. And so you get interviewed by, in my case, it was 2 family doctors and 2 pain specialists. And you do the other kinds of assessment, and they send back a report to you and to the medical board about what they think. And sadly, that report was very biased, to say the least. And I called them back and asked, why is it reported this way, when some of the doctors who interviewed me indicated different feelings about the interview than what's indicated on the report. And the medical director of that CPEP program said, well, we're here to provide educational assistance, not, to include all the positives in the report that our interviewers found. And I said, how is that possible when a lot of these reports are going to boards, and the boards, it's important for them to know the positives as well. And they just said it's not our job. And so what the CPEP educational assessment recommended was that I should refer all of my patients with intrathecal pain pumps, and so that's what I also did, to a pain specialist in Southern Oregon. And I treated these patients for almost 8 years without a single incident, and successfully. Within the first 2 or 3 months after they were transferred to another pain specialist, one was in the ICU and should have died because they had an over 800% increase in their intrathecal dosing due to an error in filling the pump. And we had 2 other patients that had to go to the hospital because they had errors in filling and or programming the pumps. Things that never happened in my care. So anyway, so my practice in Oregon was basically decimated, so I no longer practice in Oregon. I signed a stipulated order with the Oregon Medical Board in October of 2018, which puts me on probation for at least 3 years, potentially 10, and basically says that I cannot treat anybody with chronic pain, and I can write prescriptions for opiates for patients for acute pain for up to 30 days, and have some other smaller issues, but that's it. But my attorney in Oregon admits, and all he does is work with the Oregon Medical Board, that attorneys in Oregon have zero power with the board. Nobody has any power. So even if you go to a judge and you go to a hearing and the judge sides in your favor, the board can still do anything they want.
Well, we're gonna change that. I'm gonna bring on Dr. Feldman. Dr. Feldman, how are you?
Hey, how are you? Can you all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, hi, Dr. Drew, Dr. Arnold Feldman. I just caught a little bit of your story. I'm here to tell you from personal experience that medical boards, and I can't say universally because obviously I don't have experiences with all of them, but I can tell you that Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, California, Pennsylvania might be a little bit better because they lost a couple of decisions. New Jersey, and I don't have any experience with others. Let me tell you this. These boards, they say, we are independent medical boards. We are here to protect the public.
Right.
Well, that's what all despotic people tell you, right? And I used to have faith in these institutions and to a certain degree, but, and I'll try to be polite. Claudia knows that I speak my mind. This is not a rant. In other words, there is what appears to be randomness, but this is not random, if you understand what I mean. There's a coordinated effort. See, I would say that 40 years ago, that medical boards taking out doctors was random, meaning each state did their own thing, and Mississippi was bad. At one time, they had the most doctor punishments per capita, and they were proud of that, and that kind of changed over the years, and so, then some other states, they were vying for this. But this coordination comes through a number of channels. Okay, the DEA has usurped their authority.
Yeah. So
that's one channel. And in Louisiana, the DEA has an office in the medical board building at 630 Camp Street. Number two, I learned this today, that apparently in Alabama, and I couldn't quote you the statute, there's some law in Alabama that the government of Alabama cannot, the state of Alabama cannot criminally prosecute a doctor for prescribing. But there's some statute about that, and they're trying to get that changed. Meaning not doctors, the law enforcement. But
right.
So what they do is they pick up the phone, or in the case of Louisiana, walk down the hall and say, hey, Susie, we got this doctor, and he's a pain in the ass, and we want to take him out.
Right.
Would you mind? And they say, oh, no problem, Bob. And I say, hey, I got 2 tickets to the LSU game. Right? So this is how it goes. And so,
absolutely. Dr. Feldman. Dr. Feldman, let me ask you this question. And Dr. Drew, what is the solution? I'm going to let Dr. Drew go first, and then I want to hear from Dr. Feldman. Dr. Drew, how do we fight back?
Yeah, the bottom line is that there has to be some form of accountability for these medical boards. In my mind, the issue is whenever any of us as individuals or a city or state agency or federal agency doesn't have accountability, then things go off the rails. And that's what's happening with the medical boards. They have almost no accountability. In Texas, this was happening. There were insurance companies that were complaining to the board about doctors who had done nothing wrong, but the insurance companies owed the doctors money and would make a false complaint to the board, and the board would act on it just so the insurance company wouldn't have to reimburse what they owed to the physician. And so the Texas legislature got involved and restricted some of the board's authority and their power because they were, as Dr. Feldman said, doing above and beyond what they're called to do. The bottom line is how you fix this is, it's a difficult problem. Just recently, 3 weeks ago, the CDC retracted somewhat on their guidelines and saying, hey, we didn't intend all of this to take place, although I don't know how they could not have. But
basically, Dr. Drew, it's almost like they were saying, well, there's no black box warning on those CDC guidelines. We didn't intend for suicides to happen. So we're sorry, but to prevent further suicides, here's a little bit of a black box warning. Dr. Feldman, quickly, 5 seconds, how do we fight back?
Well, 5 seconds is difficult, but I'll do it. So there's two avenues: legislation, and litigation.
Right.
And congressional hearing and media. We need a congressional hearing. We need media.
Right.
You know what we need? We need a lot of doctors in their white coats at that CDC protest on June 21st with Fox, with NBC, with ABC. I'm going to bring Dr. Ibsen in on this conversation. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Hello.
Hi, Mark.
Hello, Hello. Great show, you guys.
How are you doing?
I'm good. Claudia, did you have a question for me, or did you want me to answer your question about what should we do?
Mark, I would like to know your opinion. What should we do? How do we fight back?
Well, I agree with Dr. Feldman about litigation and legislation. I wish I could think of a third L, but basically, I think that the other thing that's happening is doctors are being attacked in the media, and they have no opportunity to respond because their lawyer is always telling them to be quiet. And I think we need to change that dynamic, that doctors need a publicist. We should start a publicist company to respond like an Amber Alert on every doctor that's attacked and flood their media so that people are not seeing their doctor as a criminal. The technique is to marginalize the doctor and then hold off on any resolution or hearings long enough for the doctor's reputation to bleed away, and not only their patients, their pharmacies, and their friends will leave them, and then they have nothing but hopelessness, and they'll either take a plea or blow their brains out. And that is the truth of what's happening with doctors now.
Yeah. And,
I agree.
Yeah.
Well, Claudia, can I say one thing?
Sure.
Okay. I just sent you a copy of a lawsuit named Parker versus Mouton. Has nothing to do with what we're talking about, except this is a racial discrimination case against the Louisiana Medical Board by 10 black employees that they all fired because they needed money to pay their large salaries to their multi-million-dollar law firms. I want you to put that's real deal. They settled that case because they were afraid for it to get publicized. So put that up on the website. That comes out of the federal judiciary. So what I'm saying, and you guys are right, we need to advertise this. So I participated in a case in Virginia, and some self-styled expert named Stacy Hale from Dallas is now making $500,000 to $1 million a year, paid for by the DEA, to go and crucify you and your brethren and your sisters, meaning she alone is responsible for multiple doctors being given life sentences. So we need to communicate this. So why are we not writing Brandeis University and say, you need to distance yourself from this guy Kolodny, who in my opinion is just like the devil incarnate. So, we still, I guess, in short, we need to name names.
Yeah. So listen, so litigation, legislation, media, publicists, I think this is what every doctor's case has in common. They get accused, they've been warned, and their lawyers say, do not speak with the media. I say, Paul, speak with the media, scream your case to the media, because if you don't, guess what? You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. But at least this way, you get media involved. Your case doesn't go stale. You don't lose your patient's trust. You don't lose your patient base. You don't lose everything. I say no more to silence. We've got pain patients fighting back by the millions now, and this is what we need to do with the doctors. I've got a caller with the area code 530 waiting to come on in. Hi, caller.
Hello? Hello?
Hi there.
Hi,
Hello.
my name is Debbie Milligan. I am a patient of Dr. Drew. How are you?
Hi, Debbie. I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm not doing too good, Doc.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Me too. We miss you.
Well, thanks. I miss you guys, too.
Debbie,
My life has been...
I was just going to ask you, how has your life changed since Dr. Drew could no longer treat you?
You have no idea. It has been a living hell for me. In the last month, since January, sorry, a little emotional about this subject.
I know.
I
know.
I have had 18 back surgeries. I have rachiditis, radiculitis. I have drop foot, and Dr. Drew treated me for the last 8-9 years until January when he was taken away from us. And boy, I don't even know how to put this in words. I can't even begin to tell him the people that I've been in contact with from our clinic that they've been very worried about me. I almost died a couple times. I've lost 40 pounds. I'm no longer stable. I get 2 pills a day. And I am in bad shape. The doctors that took over our clinic are, they have no, I don't even know how to even put it. No, none.
Probably have.
We're just a number.
Yeah, that's it. Everybody's just a number. Can I ask a question? Debbie, is cannabis legal where you are? Is cannabis legal for medicinal purposes?
Only with a prescription, and they're not going to give it to us.
Yeah. I don't, Dr. Drew, in Oregon, if you're on pain medication, can you have a medicinal cannabis card as well? If you have a pain contract, some states you can't.
You can, but it's, how should I say, in a lot of states where marijuana is theoretically legal, because it's still a federal issue, the boards kind of leave it as an individual decision for doctors to make on their own. And so a lot of doctors just...
An individual decision. Wow.
Well, a lot of doctors, out of fear of the boards and not trusting them, of course, will then make demands on the patient to say, if you're on marijuana, you need to pick one or the other, even though it's not against any guideline or rule in the state. But there's such a lack of trust among the board that doctors are hyper-protective of their licenses, as they should be.
They should. Dr. Feldman, what's your wrap up real quickly before we take on another caller? What are your thoughts, Dr. Feldman? How do we leave this?
All right, a couple of things. Number one, Dr. Drew is correct. Marijuana is still a Schedule I drug on the federal, DEA list, which is a totally arbitrary list. So if you prescribe marijuana and a patient's taking opiates and they want to get you, you might as well just walk up to the prison and say, where do I check in? Okay? Right. So that's the way I look at it. Number two, I do not think, in my limited experience with marijuana, because, where we lived, it was not legal, but, just patient anecdotal stories. I do not think marijuana, that's like saying, well, you have diabetes, we can't give you insulin, so we'll give you some vitamin C. Right. It's not even, it's not treating the same disease. So my point about marijuana is this, I have no experience with it, but a doctor that does feel comfortable prescribing opiates, better not prescribe marijuana, or they are putting their necks in the guillotine.
Right.
Dr. Ibsen, you're there, correct? You're still with us?
I'm still here.
Okay, so Dr. Ibsen, you write scripts for cannabis. You chose to not prescribe opioids after your horrible situation in Montana. What are your thoughts as far as doctors prescribing both in Montana?
Well, there's an old aphorism that if your only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So my only tool left is cannabis. But I did successfully wean. I was so naive. My patients weaned off of opiates using cannabis. And this was before the CDC guidelines, so I had great success at it. 80% of my patients came off opiates, which means 20% didn't, and I'm advocating for those folks too. But the CDC guidelines are a little bit vague, but they're as clear as it can be. They just say don't test for anything that's going to not affect a patient's opiate use, and there's plenty of evidence that cannabis decreases opiate use in every state in which it's legalized. So I have some experience, I have confidence in it, but I also know that part of the attack on me was because of cannabis and opiates. Even though I was winning it, they made me a scapegoat anyway. So Arnold's right in that respect.
We go back to what do we blame for this? Do we blame the 2016 guidelines? Because this has been going on well over 20 years, Dr. Feldman. Correct? You're Harvard trained.
Can I chime in?
Oh, yes.
Quickly, I've been a pain practitioner for almost 40 years. It doesn't seem like that long, but it was bad way back when, but it wasn't like this. Meaning, the medical boards, the only reason they only prosecuted doctors because they were either sexual deviants or because of prescribing claims, okay? But see, I believe now there is money. The forfeiture laws, the civil forfeiture laws have changed. So there's money in prosecuting people and seizing their assets. That's where I believe the problem is. Now, there's a recent case in the Supreme Court in the past 60 days called Timms versus Indiana, a landmark case about civil forfeiture. And so the other thing, when we talk about litigation and legislation, I think one of the subcategories is lawyer. We got to find the right lawyers. No one person can do this. So,
and Dr. Drew does have a few lawyers that he's been working with that have offered their services. Dr. Drew, you mentioned Michael Hiller. Was that the name? Attorney Michael Hiller?
Michael Harris.
Michael Harris. What did Attorney Harris say about this? Was he working in conjunction with your attorney on your case? Or
not with my attorney on my case. I pursued a different attorney in Oregon to somehow represent my patients and the patients of Oregon against the board or the state. And she's still trying to find avenues, legal avenues to move forward. And I provided her the phone number of Michael Harris, and she contacted him after I had talked to him, and he offered his legal support if she can find any way of finding a legal precedent against the state to file something.
Well, may I?
Yeah, just quickly.
Look,
let's remove. Go ahead.
If you talk to 10 lawyers, you're going to get 10 different answers, right? And they all say you can't win. Well, I got news for you. I went to Abington High School in Pennsylvania, and the case where the Bible was, stricken from the school, meaning you couldn't have school prayer in a public school, was Shemp versus Abington in my school district. Now, that didn't happen overnight. So Timms versus Indiana, a group called the Institute for Justice took this case. The ACLU takes certain cases. So bottom line is, let me ask you a question, Dr. Drew, within a ballpark. How much money did you spend on lawyers?
Over 100,000.
All right, I spent 500, maybe $1 million, right? I don't have two nickels to friggin' rub together, right? And every one of them bailed out when I said, this judge is taking money from the law firm that represents the medical board, which I proved by just searching, public disclosure records. And so there's so few of them. And so let me tell you the way it goes. RICO got treble damages plus attorney's fees. 1983 has attorney's fees. So these are the avenues, RICO and 1983, meaning civil rights discrimination. And basically what we need to do, and forgive me for monopolizing the conversation, but I've been dealing with this for decades. We need to walk into a law firm, and most of them will say no, with $1 million backing and 10,000 plaintiffs, and say, I have $1 million to start this litigation. What do you think? And it has to be somebody like Claudia, who they believe. See, me and you and Ibsen, we're just a bunch of disgruntled doctors. We need people that are believable. They figure you got millions of dollars stashed away somewhere from ripping off insurance companies. This is how they see us. So
okay, but what about the patients?
Well, what I'm saying is, I talked to a lawyer the other day, and I said, I can deliver 10,000 plaintiffs to you if you will help us. Well, let me think about it.
Yeah. So, all right, Dr. Feldman, Dr. Feldman, you and I, we're going to talk, Dr. Feldman and I, Dr. Drew, we talk probably 6 times a day. We're always brainstorming. Dr. Feldman, thank you so much for calling and sharing your thoughts. We appreciate it.
Thank you all. I'm sorry, but take somebody else's call.
Thank you, Dr. Feldman. So, Dr. Drew, the name Kay Teague, her first name is Kay, last name Teague, I believe. I think that's the name that you mentioned to me. Was she your personal attorney or another attorney that?
No, she was not my attorney representing me with the board. She was somebody that I got her name from somebody else to contact, so that's what I did. And actually I talked to the head of her firm first, and he had some interest and allowed her to kind of take it on, and she's fairly passionate about the issue. And I think Debbie, the patient that's on the phone, has spoke to Kay a few times as well, and so have some other patients. So she's trying to do something, but
I emailed Kay Teague, and I said, let me know what you need me to do. And I'm going to follow up with Michael Harris. We've got a caller with area code 262. Hi, caller.
Hi, everybody. This is Dave from Wisconsin. Now, we had an amazing archive of very fine writing from Dr. Mangino, who was in jail for 8 years, and he said he didn't suffer terribly in the jail environment, and they let him use the library, and he studied law in that time, and he has a pile of writings at LinkedIn that are still there. I know he has liver cancer, that detailed this effort to get lawyers. He wants to use retired senators, congressmen, and doctors, and he there's just a pile of stuff there about this exact same thing.
That's wonderful. I've been meaning to check on him. Dave, thank you for your call. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
So, Dr. Drew, where are you in the process right now? You're no longer in Oregon working. You're in Northern California. You're working as a general practitioner. How has this affected you? How has this affected your ability to be a doctor to your patients? Have you lost faith? Where are you in the process?
Yeah, kind of like you were astonished at what doctors can do, because we tend to grow up holding them or putting them on a pedestal, and I likewise have been so discouraged with the whole process and the lack of integrity of physicians and the boards and this physician education program the lack of integrity within the medical field is incredibly discouraging. We're financially having a hard time, but I mean, we're still working and doing okay. And my hope is through all this that patients like Debbie and other providers we can somehow find a way to move forward to change what's going on, because the system is completely out of control and there's no accountability, and there's thousands or millions across the country that are suffering needlessly, and we have the opportunity to help them, and yet we can't. And there's doctors who will not treat patients with chronic pain right now are like lepers. Nobody wants to touch them. Nobody wants to treat them. And it's a horrible situation for providers and for patients mostly. And it's created by the boards and the DEA. And the CDC guidelines that came out in 2016 just gave them all the ammunition they needed to really move forward.
Absolutely. We're going to take another caller with area code 951. Hi, caller.
Hi, Claudia. It's Michelle Kakamisi.
Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Dr. Drew.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming on and educating us. I'm a nurse here in Northern California, and I just wanted to come on and I wanted to agree with you and tell you I'm really distraught by the integrity of the healthcare field right now, and how I'm just shocked that, like, where is everybody? Like, as a nurse, I know that pain is real, just like it is. That's why you were treating your patients. And, like, where are all the nurses? Where are all the nurses' unions? Where is the medical board? Like, I don't know how we get them involved, but are they just listening to the media? Do they think that the prescriptions are really the issue? It's upsetting.
Well, I think there's a couple issues. I think certainly in the 90s there was over-prescribing. I think everybody agrees with that, without enough control or oversight from the providers. It doesn't mean they were doing anything nefarious or something bad. It was just that there wasn't enough oversight. And so it created a problem, but the backlash of that is well beyond what it should be. And what most people hope for, including the patients that are suffering and the providers that want to treat them, is that there's something in the middle. And right now that's gone too far, way to the extreme, where patients are being harmed, and there's, like Claudia mentioned, there's a huge increase in suicides, and patients like Debbie are doing far less well than they were before when there's a treatment that we have for them. This is why the Human Rights Watch looked at it at the United States regarding this whole issue, chronic pain and post-op pain treatment, because it's a human rights issue when you have a way to treat them and you're withholding that treatment.
And Laura Mills from the Human Rights is still very involved. I think it really struck a chord with the organization.
Right.
So I think whenever I speak with lawmakers, I say, while I empathize with all those who have lost a loved one, I empathize, lost a loved one to the manufactured opioid crisis. I must empathize with the 50 million. I empathize with the 50 million who were no longer able to get out of their bed. I mean, I know how my life changed when pain management was introduced, and for me, it was the very last option. But it was, it's always looming in the back of my head, like, wow, I could go back to my hospital bed. Dr. Drew, I can't thank you enough for coming on. I didn't want to, you seem like a very zen individual, and I didn't want to terrorize you. I can be a little aggressive, as we know. I
enjoyed it.
Yeah, and I'm so thrilled that we got a chance to meet, and I know Dr. Ibsen was waiting for us, and I'm glad that we're all connecting, and I know there's a balance, and I know President Trump needs to be involved. Without Trump intervening, we're going to have the battle of our lifetime. So on behalf of your patients in Oregon and California, a true heartfelt thank you. Folks, thank you so much for joining us tonight. lastly, have an amazing rally. Remember, you protest with dignity. Be seen, be heard. Have an amazing week this week. This is when we empower one another. I always like to leave you with this thought. I get my strength through your strength. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for the DPP Rally Talk Show. Subscribe to our channel at DPP Rally Talk Show with Claudia on YouTube. Copyright 2019. All rights reserved.